Hello and welcome to Salt Lake Community College's inaugural Giving Day. Giving Day is when we at SLCC give back to the community and provide great opportunities for the students to make college affordable. My name is Jeffrey Coker, and I am the Associate Dean of the Culinary Institute here at SLCC, and I'm really excited to be here with you today and to give you a little cooking experience as part of this opportunity for us to give back to the community, so you get a cooking class for free. Today we're going to be working on a wonderful, very flavorful dish called chicken chasseur. And chicken chasseur is a classic dish that we're going to be able to make in a family-style preparation that's super simple for you guys to do at home. As we get started and working on this recipe, there are a few things that we like to teach our students here at the Institute where we make sure to get them prepared as we move forward to cook. So first and foremost, got to have your recipe. So the recipe that we're going to be using today is enough to feed a family of 4 to 6 people very easily. We're going to get started by fabricating a raw chicken, and I don't want you to get too scared about fabricating a raw chicken. We're going to break it down and make it a very simple process for you to follow. And then this dish is very flavorful, which is going to include some delicious cremini mushrooms. So cremini, they look like white buttons, but they're brown. They have a very similar flavor to like what you would have with like a small portobello mushroom, okay? We have some beautiful Roma tomatoes, shallots, a little bit of garlic, some Italian parsley, and of course, a little French touch of butter never goes a long way, okay? So we'll get these things started for you as we get going here to start with our chicken fabrication. So an important thing to keep in mind whenever you're working with raw proteins, we always want to make sure that we keep them cold. So our whole chicken here, I would just remove from the refrigerator. And if your refrigerator, hopefully it's close by in your kitchen, but if it's not, it's always great to use a pan of ice underneath. So whenever I'm working with raw protein, poultry especially, I always like to make sure that I'm wearing disposable gloves to keep things nice and clean and sanitized. So this is a standard whole chicken from the grocery store, all right? It's about 2.5 to 3.5 pounds. And the great part about this is if you get a little bit comfortable working with a large piece of protein, using this is going to be a lot more affordable than buying the parts and pieces that are already cut up for you, okay? So just kind of a quick overview of what we're looking for, right? We have the breast meat up on top with the wingtips, the forearm, and the arm bone. We have our drumstick and our thigh. And it's important to know and identify where these parts and pieces are because it makes it that much easier when you're going to use your knife to cut. So today, for this type of chicken fabrication, we're going to be making what is called a fricassee style chicken fabrication. So this is where we basically remove the backbone, but we're going to leave the other bones in the chicken as part of the dish to add more flavor while it's roasting and then stewing in the sauce as well. So this is a very simple style presentation that we're going to make here. What I want to do is I want to stand the chicken up with the backbone facing me. And I'm going to take my chef's knife and I'm going to run my knife right down the backbone in between the backbone and the cartilage. Your knife should run through fairly easily as you get straight down and through the tail end of the bird. As you get down towards the bottom, you may run into a little resistance here where the hip bone attaches to the backbone, okay? So we're going to do that now. And if I could turn this around a little bit and show you, what we're going to be doing is we'll just take the tip of the knife and we're just going to slice straight down all the way through to remove that backbone. We will repeat, do the same thing on the other side. Something that you always want to make sure that you pay attention to here is if you're feeling your knife having too much resistance, stop and take a look at what you're cutting so that you don't accidentally cut your hand. So at this point, this is the backbone that we're going to remove. We'll put that over to the side. That's something that you could easily save down the road to make a great roasted bone and then turn into a wonderful chicken stock that you can use for soup or stew down the road, okay? So now that we have our chicken backbone removed, we're going to then take a look at inside of the cavity behind the breast meat. We have this triangular shaped bone. This is called the keel bone. The keel bone kind of connects the wishbone at the top and runs all the way down the length of the breast meat. So what I want to do is I want to take my knife and I want to kind of make just a little score so I can see exactly where I want to slice. And then using the knife and a little bit more of the meaty part of the knife, I'm going to slice through the cartilage at the top of the keel bone, and I'm just going to place my hand straight across and apply some pressure so that we can slice directly down that keel bone. Once we've gone through that cartilage, we can slice to simply remove the 2 pieces of chicken, and then this is what you would have for half chickens. I always like to make sure that we remove the wingtips because the wingtips typically burn and get too dark. So we want to go ahead and trim those off. You can do this with your chef's knife by simply cutting through the joint there, or you could always use a pair of poultry shears if you feel more comfortable, okay? So at this point then, what we're going to do is we're going to separate the leg-thigh combo with the breast meat. To do this, we simply find the seam right in between. You have the whole leg, and you have the whole breast. We'll repeat this on the other side. And one of the things you want to keep in mind, as you are working with pieces of meat like this, it's always a great idea to look before you cut, and then identify where you want to cut by finding the seam, okay? So at this point now, we have your quartered chicken. So we have our whole leg, thigh, drumstick combo, and then we have our breast meat with the wingtip and the rib bone still attached, all right? What we want to do is we now want to cut this into 8s. So fricassee chicken, again, is a chicken in 8 pieces. What we're going to do is we're going to cut our breast into roughly about 1/3 to include the top of the breast meat with the arm bone, and 2/3 with the tail meat of the breast meat. So by doing this, we kind of just go on an angle, we slice down through the meat, and then we crack the bones as we go through the rib bones on the back side, so that you end up with 2 nice pieces. We'll reserve these over to the side, and we'll repeat same thing on the other side. So about 1/3, 2/3, slice on an angle so it looks like we have even portions, and we'll reserve that to the side. The leg-thigh combo is a little bit more difficult to slice through. It's not really difficult, but I'll give you the little trick. So, as you can see on the meat side of the drumstick and thigh, we have a fat line that's running perpendicular across the piece of leg-thigh combo. If I place my knife on the drumstick side of that fat line that's running across, I will cut through that joint every time. So that's a good little trick that you're going to be able to take with you, okay? So again, we identify the fat line that runs across the leg-thigh combo. I'm going to place my knife on the drumstick side of that fat line, and we're going to slice straight through, okay? So at this point, unless you have a lot of excess skin and fat on your pieces of meat, this is very nicely trimmed leg and thigh pieces, breast meat, ready to go. So at this point, we're going to get ourselves cleaned up a little bit. We're going to move to the next step. Great. So now we've fabricated our chicken. We've reserved it over to the side on an ice bath or in your refrigerator. The next thing that we want to do is make sure that we have a clean cutting board and station, so we've washed everything down, we've sanitized everything, and now we're going to get working on our mise en place. Mise en place means everything in its place. It effectively means that your station is set up, ready to go, which makes it a lot easier as you go cook. Now this might be a little bit of overkill for us at home, but it still is good practice. So what we want to do is work on a couple things here. So first of all, our shallots. Our end product is going to be a rough cut, or what we call like a small dice shallot. The sauce that we're making today is going to be chunky. It's going to look like a ragu. So when you serve this, you want something to eat. You want something to bite into. That's where a lot of that flavor is going to come, especially when it's on top of the delicious chicken, okay? So in order to get our shallots cut down, we want to take our whole shallots, and I've already peeled them, but the shallots sometimes come in 2 pieces. So you would simply remove the skins of the shallot, much as you would with an onion, pull them apart, peel the outside layer of skin, and then you would go through, make your slices, and then you would chop this so that you get some nice, consistently sized chopped shallot, okay? So that's the one thing. We also took our Italian parsley, and we have minced that down so it's a nice rough chop on the parsley. We're gonna use the parsley to finish our sauce and add some really bright flavor at the end just before we're ready to put the chicken back inside. We have some butter that I've chopped up here, and that way we have the butter we're gonna add to the sauce. We're also gonna use some of the butter while we're basting the chicken, okay? We also have the Roma tomato. So the interesting thing about the Roma tomato, what we want to do is make a preparation called, in French terminology, called a concassé. A concassé means the tomato has been peeled, seeded, and diced so that we only have the pure tomato meat remaining from the tomato itself. So when doing this, we want to make sure that we use a slightly firmer Roma tomato or a vine-ripened tomato, 5x6, any type of tomato you want. And what we're going to do is we're going to place an X, just cutting through the skin a little bit, not all the way through. And what we're going to do is we're going to take the tomato just like this, and we're going to take this over and place it into some no salt boiling water. And you want to blanch that for just a couple of minutes. And as soon as you start to see the skin peel, we're going to remove that, and we're going to place that into an ice bath to stop the cooking process. Once the tomato is cooled to touch, then you can remove it and start peeling the skin with a small paring knife. After you're finished, you'll quarter the tomato, remove the seeds and the core, and then cut strips, and then ultimately dice the tomato. Pretty straightforward. You want to have some nice, consistent, even sizes on the tomatoes so that eventually they're all going to warm through and cook into the sauce. I hope you're hungry, okay? The last little piece that we're going to actually have are our cremini mushrooms. So these cremini mushrooms don't require a lot of cleaning, but here's a great tip for you. We want to use the stems. So we're going to slice a little bit of the stem off, and then for larger cremini mushrooms, we're going to simply take those and quarter them. For some of the smaller ones, same thing, but just cut them in half and you'll be fine. Ultimately, what we're looking for here is that the mushrooms are uniform in size, so they all cook evenly. Pretty straightforward. So at this point, we also have our white wine for this recipe. Now, if you choose not to use white wine, you can make this sauce from start to finish without the white wine at all. Or if you're still looking for a little bit of extra flavor, we can always add something like maybe a fruit juice, maybe even like apple juice, for example. Okay, that'll add a little bit of sweetness to the sauce and give you a little bit of zip on the end as well. Okay, we have our salt and pepper ready to go, and then I also have a little bit of fresh thyme and garlic cloves that I'm going to use in the pan while the chicken is browning, and we're going to use those extra flavors to baste while we're cooking our chicken. Now that we have everything mise en place out, it's time to get cooking. So what we're going to do is we're going to season our chicken. When we talk about seasoning proteins, we always refer to salt and pepper. Otherwise, we're flavoring. And when we flavor proteins, we flavor things with herbs, spices, and aromatics. Okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to season. We're going to start making sure that our chicken is nice and clean, it's dry, and we want to season up high. So we want to dust the salt and pepper through our fingers, and we want to sprinkle each of the pieces on the skin side first so that we have nice, even coverage. And by doing this, we get a nice, even dusting. You want to avoid trying to season something right down on top of the piece of protein. So we always want to sift this through our fingertips. So as far as seasoning is concerned, use your judgment. Do you like salt and pepper? Do you not like salt and pepper? You don't even need to use salt and pepper if you don't want to. This dish has wonderful flavor by itself. So now that we've seasoned generously across the pieces of protein, we're going to take this over to the stove and we're going to start our cooking technique. To do that, though, we're going to need our blended olive oil. So blended olive oil is important. We want to use instead of a pure virgin olive oil, because a blended oil includes usually like a canola oil. And this brings a higher smoke point to us. So while we're cooking, it doesn't burn and smoke as quickly as pure olive oil does. So we always want to use a blend. And then, of course, we have to add a little bit of French touch of butter that gives us so much flavor while we're going to baste. And then in the saute pan, we're also going to use some fresh thyme sprigs and some garlic cloves. This is going to add a lot of flavor as we start cooking. So here we go. So we're going to take our chicken over our stove. And in my saute pan, I have a medium-high heat on the stove. And I'm going to take my oil blend, and I'm going to make sure that I add enough olive oil to lightly coat the bottom of the pan. All right? We don't want our chicken swimming inside of our saute pan, and we also don't want to see too much smoke coming off of the surface. So while you're cooking, it's also really important that we want to go ahead and make sure that we're using a nice dry side towel for handling hot pans. At this point, using your pair of tongs, we're going to place the chicken into the saute pan, and we want to hear that sizzle. So this is the beginning of our saute technique. So I'll do just 4 pieces at a time so I don't overcrowd the pan. It's really important that when you're starting to saute, our intention here is to get GBD, golden brown and delicious. It's what makes your proteins flavorful, okay? So this is, if we get a little bit more technical, what we refer to as the Maillard reaction, okay? So we want this to allow it to cook or sear, all right? So we get that nice golden brown color. Of course, what we do to one side, we need to do to the other side. So I'm going to bring my salt and pepper over, and I'm going to repeat the same process of seasoning the other sides of the chicken so that the other side tastes good too, okay? So nice little generous seasoning. And then we're going to go ahead and we're going to add our aromatics to help flavor some of the chicken with our fresh thyme sprigs and our garlic cloves. And you could just sprinkle those throughout the pan, no problem. And then we want to add some delicious, wonderful flavor of butter. So we'll add a couple of tablespoons of butter. Okay, maybe 3. All right? And we're going to put that inside. And then as we're allowing the chicken to sear, what we want to do is just give the pan a little bit of a shake so that we see that the chicken's not sticking. And then we'll just kind of tilt the pan to one side and we'll baste over the top of the chicken, just using a nice little tablespoon. That's all we're looking for here, okay? We want to control our heat. We don't need to sit here and shake the pan every 2 seconds. All we're looking to do is keep the chicken from sticking and basting so that we get some really good flavor across the chicken. Once we get a nice golden brown color on the skin side, we'll flip this over, get a little bit of color on the meat side or the bone side, and then we'll move that to our roasting rack. And I've lined my sheet pan and my roasting rack with some aluminum foil, so it helps with cleanup later. Good little tip. Okay? And we want to keep a nice even temperature on the pan while this is happening. So something that we always talk about is we're cooks, we're not food assemblers. Food assemblers, they just follow a recipe. Cooks, we adjust things as we cook. So we taste, we season, we adjust, we reduce, everything is needed. Okay? So what we're looking for here, using your pair of tongs, is we want to take a look and see, are we getting that nice golden brown color that we want on the chicken, right? So when you look at that, your mouth should start watering immediately. That means you're doing a good job. And notice, we have complete control over what we're searing here, okay? This isn't billowing out smoke from the pan. We're controlling our heat. Perhaps you've seen me adjust 1 or 2 times. You are in control of the heat source. So once you have that nice golden brown color that you're looking for, all you're going to do is flip the chicken in the pan. Okay? Give a little bit of a shake so you know nothing's sticking on the bottom. And then what we'll end up doing is we'll come back, we'll tilt the pan, and we will baste our chicken to get some of that beautiful color and flavor over the top of our chicken. And as you do this, you'll also notice that the chicken starts to take on a beautiful shine on the skin side. So you'll see it almost starts to look like glazing. That's great. So we're gonna finish this up. I'll go back and I'll sear the other few pieces of chicken, and then we'll get started on our sauce. Our chicken looks really great now. We have obtained the GBD, the golden brown and delicious color that we're looking for on our chicken. So we're gonna take this and we're gonna place this into a 425-degree oven. And we're going to allow that to roast now until we have obtained 165-degree temperature on an internal reading with our thermometer. We'll get to that in a little bit when it's time. But for right now, we have this saute pan from where we seared our chicken breasts, or chicken meat, sorry. And we need to now use this pan and all the delicious scraps at the bottom to make our sauce. So the very first thing that we want to remember is we don't want to cook with fat that has already been used to cook with. We would instead prefer to keep all the scraps in the bottom of the pan and move to discard the old fat. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to take our tongs and all that old fat, we're going to get rid of that just into a separate pan, which we can ultimately discard. We'll return this pan to the heat, and what we're going to do is we're going to add some fresh butter. So to get started, we're going to add a couple of tablespoons, okay, maybe 3 again, of butter, and we're going to use this to start cooking our mushrooms first. Now, you might think that you would start cooking your shallots first. The problem is, by the time the mushrooms properly cook, the shallots would already be burnt, and that's not what we want. So we want to start with a liberal amount of butter, because butter in moderation is flavor. And we're going to take our quartered cremini mushrooms, and we're going to go ahead and add those to the pan. And again, this sauce is going to be a very chunky, hearty, flavorful sauce. So at this point, we can turn the heat up a little bit in the pan because we're not as worried about burning mushrooms like we are burning chicken. And we can control this a little bit more. So at this point, I'm going to switch from using a pair of tongs to a spoon. So at this point, we're just going to make sure that our mushrooms are evenly coated with the butter. And as you can see, I added 3 tablespoons of butter into that saute pan, and the mushrooms already absorbed it. Okay? Now, as these mushrooms start to cook and wilt down, some of the moisture will be brought out in the mushrooms, which is perfectly fine because that adds flavor. What we want to do is avoid using too much butter. So for the amount of mushrooms we're using today, 3 tablespoons is a pretty good amount, all right? Once these mushrooms start to cook down and we start to see that they're getting tender, right? That's where a lot of the flavor comes. I think one of the biggest mistakes that we see is that people rush too quickly to saute their mushrooms, and they lose so much texture and flavor because they don't cook them long enough, okay? So I want to cook these down until we start to see that the mushrooms are really sponge-like, okay? At that point then, we're going to throw in our shallots and cook the shallots with the mushrooms. Now, if you don't want to try and do the flip action and end up with mushrooms all over the place, just keep it on the stovetop, use your tool, use your utensil, and just move it around as you need to. All right. Now, questions come up all the time. Obviously, this is a protein dish. This is a meat dish. How could I turn this into a vegetarian dish? All right? Well, there's a couple of options that you would look at. So let's say that you really like mushrooms. I would get a really nice sized portobello mushroom. I'd give it a clean. I'd scrape out the bottom side. And then you can go through searing the portobello and roast it in the oven just like you did with the chicken. A little bit of salt and pepper, And I'll be honest with you, even a little bit of fresh herbs on top of the mushrooms are great when they start cooking. So portobello mushroom with this recipe is a great option. If you want to get a little bit more adventurous, you can always look at doing a firm tofu, seasoning a firm tofu, slice it into steaks. Maybe you prefer to use like seitan, all right? You can always use seitan. It has a very similar profile, texture profile to like a chicken breast does when everything's said and done. So those are some really great alternatives to consider. Now, our mushrooms have started to cook down. They're getting tender, and that's what I'm looking for. We got that beautiful aroma that's coming out. My mouth's starting to water, right? Hopefully yours is starting to water too while you're watching this. And next we'll start to add our chopped shallots. So our chopped shallots, remember, they're evenly chopped. We're just going to go ahead and sprinkle those inside. And we'll cook the shallots together with the cremini mushrooms. And what we're looking for this to happen at this point is we want this all cooked down until the shallots now become almost really tender and translucent, okay? That's the trick. We don't want like a raw onion flavor in the sauce. We're looking for this to get nice and sweet as we build our layers of flavor. Now, the other thing to keep in mind here, notice I haven't added any extra salt and pepper at that point. Salt and pepper is something that we can add towards the end because what we need to take into account while our sauce is cooking is we have reduction. And as a sauce reduces, we have a concentration of flavors. And guess what? Salt and pepper, they don't cook out. They get more intense as they cook, okay? So it's something to keep in mind. So we're going to go ahead, give this a couple more flips, a little bit more of a stir. We have everything coming together. We have a nice, really sweet, robust aroma. And now comes the good stuff. We're going to put a little bit of the white wine in the pan. Now, whenever you add white wine, and if you choose not to add white wine, this would be the point you could add your apple juice, like I referenced at the beginning of the video. We could pull this off the stove. We're going to add our white wine in, and we're going to place that on the stove. Now, keep in mind, when I remove that, the alcohol in the wine may ignite, especially if it catches some of the flame when you put the pan back on. So when you do that, be very careful that you might get a little bit of ignition of flame there from the alcohol burning. Now, here's one of the most common misconceptions, all right? If you do not like using wine, if you do not drink wine, then definitely do not use it while you're cooking, okay? Reason why. When we say that we're cooking off the alcohol in the wine, no matter how much you cook it, the wine, the alcohol is still going to be there. All we're doing when we apply heat to the wine and we're reducing this down is we're reducing the tannic properties of the wine. So in other words, we're getting rid of some of that really acidic flavor, all right? So as you're using wine to cook with in a sauce like this, you're going to want to reduce by half. So if you started with a half a cup of wine, reduce that down to a quarter and you'll be good to go, okay? And at this point, you're really starting to pick up some of the fragrance of the shallots, the mushrooms, the white wine. And once you've reduced about by half, which should for this amount, should only take a minute, maybe 2 minutes. Now we're going to go over to our hot stock that's been simmering on the stove. So our hot chicken stock that's been simmering on the stove has been cooking and reducing this whole time. We have a beautiful deep color, a wonderful aroma, right? And I'm going to then add the amount of stock I need to be able to balance this out. So at the end of the day, when you're looking to plate this recipe and everything, what we're trying to do is have a balance of the liquid component from the stock, the mushrooms, the shallots, the chunky tomatoes, the nice fresh parsley that we've chopped up, and you want everything to be like a big ragu. That's what we're looking for here, all right? So at this point, you see that the sauce is kind of simmering away. That's a little bit too high of a heat. So I want to reduce this down to a gentle simmer at this point because I don't want this boiling so rapidly that we get like burn rings around the side of the pan, because anything that burns around the edge of the pan, we end up pulling that flavor back into our sauce, and that's not what we're looking for. So at this point, we're going to go ahead and we're going to allow this sauce to simmer until I get the consistency I'm looking for. At that point, we're going to go and add the rest of our ingredients. Our sauce is looking really good at this point, and we're ready to go ahead for the next steps. So now that we have our sauce here, what I want to do is give this a quick taste. So I have a tasting spoon, and I'm, at this point, just looking for to see where is my salt, where is my pepper, where is my acid at, all right? And at this point then, keep in mind, we're going to go ahead and add our tomatoes. So when we add our fresh tomatoes, remember these will break down a little bit, but they're also going to add some acidity, okay? So that will help to cut through the richness of the sauce, right? So we'll go ahead and add the tomatoes in, and we're going to allow these to cook through for just a minute or 2 minutes. We don't need to let these cook very long at all right? Effectively, what we're looking for here is the tomatoes to just kind of soften up, get warm in the sauce, right? If we need to, we go back, like I said, we adjust our heat. I know that from tasting this, I need a little bit more pepper, and we'll add just a little bit of salt, okay? Not too much. It's important that when you're making your sauces, your gravies, anything that, any type of sauce that you're going to serve with your protein, the proper amount of sauce to use is that you want to make sure that you have enough sauce for every bite of protein for each of your guests. So that's kind of a good indication, right? Effectively, we would say somewhere around 2 to 3 ounces of sauce per piece of protein per person. So once we have the tomatoes that have been cooked through here a little bit, I want to go ahead and grab another spoon, give this one more taste. Okay? And then what we're looking for here, at the end of the day, we're looking for the sauce to coat our spoon. All right? We want to coat the spoon, not so much that it's sticking, want that sauce to run off, but not be so liquefied that it just looks like water in the pan still. Okay? So if you need to allow this to continue to reduce, you reduce a little bit. The last step that we're going to do, actually we have 2 more steps. We're going to take a little bit of that fresh parsley and we're going to sprinkle that in. And this is really going to start to brighten up that sauce now with that fresh parsley. We'll swirl this in. And you notice how dark that chicken stock got, okay? That chicken stock got this dark because it's been reducing. But I also have color that came from the mushrooms as well, and the sauteing, and all that wonderful flavor at the bottom of the pan from when we browned our chicken. So that's what we call, at the bottom of the pan, the sook, S-U-C-S. A lot of people, you might hear, call it the fond. Fond actually refers to stock, all right? At the bottom of the pan after you brown meat is called the sook, S-U-C-S, okay? So now we have all this flavor going. The very last thing that we're going to do is we're going to turn off our heat and we're going to add a nice little touch of butter. So for this amount, I'm probably going to look about putting at least 2 tablespoons. I might lie, I might go back to 3 again, but I reserve the right to add butter as I need to. So have fun with it, okay? Now, the important thing here is after you add your whole butter, you no longer want to allow this sauce to simmer. So notice I shut the heat off, okay? We're just going to swirl that butter in. And when we add that butter to the sauce, we're going to add some beautiful shine and some richness to this sauce. Okay? So once the butter is nice melted in, we're going to go back and have one more taste to see if we need to do any final adjustments. What you should be tasting here is a good balance between your mushrooms and your stock and your shallots, your tomatoes. You should taste everything, okay? And notice in the sauce, I have as much liquid as I do all the good chunky stuff, okay? Very important. And that's an official culinary term, the chunky stuff, okay? So enjoy what you're doing. Sauce is looking great. We've tasted it, we've adjusted the seasoning, and now it's time to check our chicken. At this point, it's been in the oven for about 15 to 20 minutes. So what we want to do is carefully open this, make sure that we use 2 dry side towels, oven mitts, and we want to carefully pull this out. And we always want to bring the protein that we're cooking up to the surface and then close your oven. We never want to try and take the temperature of something that we're cooking while the oven door is open because we lose too much heat. So at this point, look at that GBD. If your mouth wasn't watering before, it better be watering now, or I'm not going to be a happy guy. Okay? Okay, I'm just having fun. Okay? But what we're looking to do here is we want to take a nice thermometer, all right? And what we want to do is we want to insert the thermometer into the thickest part of each piece of protein when you're working with multiple pieces. And we want to make sure that we register a minimum of 165 degrees so that we don't have the risk of any contamination. So we go through and we're looking at every single piece. We're registering to make sure that we hit that 165. And at this point, we're good to go. And we're going to let this rest for a little bit at this point. Now that our chicken is rested, we're going to go ahead and we're going to add our chicken to the sauce. And then that way we will be able to baste the chicken all throughout the sauce, have some great flavor, and then we'll put it on the plate and get ready to serve. Remove the pan, put that to the side. And then we'll get all that delicious sauce right over the top of the chicken, tilting the pan. Ready to go. And the great part about doing something like this, you'll even have some of the juices from the chicken getting into your sauce, which is going to add even more flavor. We're getting really close to plating this and starting to eat some delicious food. And before we do, let's talk about how we're going to serve this. So this recipe that we have for you is designed to kind of serve a larger family. So typically we would do something like this and serve it family style. So we would look at a couple of platter options. If I was only going to be serving 4 pieces at a time, a nice platter like this would work well. But since we're going to serve everything all at once, we'll go ahead and use a larger platter for buffet service. So at this point, I also have, very important, a great tool to have next to you is a little bit of wet paper towel to clean up any of the spills when you're finished. So we're going to start by making sure we bring our pieces of chicken right over, and we'll plate these out and just kind of keep them together with a little bit of space in between. We'll make it look really nice so that everybody can look like they're getting equal portions and all that good stuff. And while you're doing this, being sure that you're trying not to make your mouth water. Very important. Okay. We'll put this together. There we go. One more piece at the end. Okay. And then at this point, what we want to do is take our sauce, and again, controlling what we're doing, we want as much of the chunky stuff as we do the liquid. So we want to get a nice even sample across the pieces of protein. I got to tell you, my mouth's watering. I can't even stand it right now. So as you're starting to plate this and we're getting this going, I think it's really neat to let's start talking about a couple of side dishes. So with a dish like this, chicken chasseur, we could look at doing some roasted red bliss potatoes. We could look at doing your favorite mashed potatoes. We could also look at doing a nice rice pilaf as some starch options. Or on the vegetable side, how about some nice fresh sauteed yellow and green zucchini squash? Or maybe some sauteed green beans with some more mushrooms inside. Why not? Okay. So at the end of the day, what we have for you is our beautiful chicken chasseur that we started with our whole chicken. We cut it down into pieces. All right. And as we get ready to serve this and plate this and sit down and have a nice meal together, I'd like to thank you guys for being here and watching today. And thank you for being a part of the Salt Lake Community College's first annual Giving Day, which is on February 17th. So again, my name is Jeffrey Coker, Associate Dean for the Culinary Institute. Thanks again. It's been great having you. If you have any questions about the recipe, please don't hesitate to let us know.